had a varied life as a professional musician and a technology reporter, particularly reporting on Silicon Valley for the San Jose Mercury News for the last 10 years. And Dan is engaged now in a new venture, which he's going to tell us something about, at least the concepts behind what he's aiming for. He's the author of We the Media, Grassroots Journalism by and for the People, published by Tim O'Reilly's Press, and which you can buy back here, or you can download and pay a whole lot more for the paper and ink. No charges than you would if you bought the book. Unless you're a student and have paid for unlimited printing through your student fees. It's been really nice having Dan here this week because I've been trying to ruin his health with good Southern food and pointing out where the cardiovascular units of the hospital are after we went to Allen inside. But in particular, we've had a great time at the Target Bloggers Conference that Anton Zuckier helped put together. We had really good turnout and really good interactions there. And now we're at the tail end of Dan's visit. He's going to be about what he means by citizens journalism, what he means by we the media, as opposed to single bloggers writing, which would merely be me the media. So it's Dan Gillmor.
Thank you. I'm still thinking about that barbecue. Although there are other parts of the country that might dispute the barbecue title.
They would be wrong.
And as Paul says, they would be wrong, and that's that. So it really is nice to come here. I just want to say something about this man. I hope you understand, all of you, what what an amazing person you have in your midst with Paul Jones, and what an astonishing thing that he and his colleagues have been doing over the last years, and who don't get nearly sufficient credit for their achievements. I really want to be clear on how much I admire them and what they've done, and how inspiring it is really for a lot of other folks to see what can be done by some committed individuals who do things that where there's no sense of, well, why not try? I love the why not try idea. It's part of what I've loved about Silicon Valley is the culture of risk that I've gotten to know a little bit, and that seems to pervade a lot of what goes on there. So I want to just kind of whip through a whole bunch of slides and talk about the rise of this thing that we're calling grassroots journalism, or citizens media, or whatever we want to call it, and get quickly to whatever questions you have and really talk about it together. And some baseline things that, the old media, new media, now what people are calling we media, and that there's I'm pretty sure that the grassroots phenomenon is going to become not necessarily pervasive, but common anyway, and that we won't be, in a few years, we won't be looking at it the way the New York Times did today, where they said, oh, those bloggers are at it again. I think that will be more taken for granted, and that the baseline from which it comes up is this increasingly ubiquitous networking that's going on, data networking everywhere, and that the publishing by anyone is a fairly profound change from what we've done in the past, and that we need to think about it, and that it at heart is about something that the web was designed to be by Tim Berners-Lee, which is a read and write medium, not a read-only medium. the way it developed for the first few years of websites. We basically were reading from them. And occasionally we'd click on something and maybe search for things, but there was a fairly read-only nature to it, and that it changed to read-write, and that's very important. And the blogs, which get all of the talk now, are only a part of that ecosystem that's developing, though a very important one, because blogs were the first example of people really finding it easy to write on the web where they could create their own sites. And that in all of this, there are some fairly large implications for all of the constituencies of journalism, which is the piece I'm going to talk about. The journalists have to learn new things. The newsmakers, the people, the institutions that we cover are learning about how this works. That's something being done to them, and they also have new tools. And I will point out that the newsmakers now include journalism organizations in a fairly profound way, and Eason Jordan's resignation from CNN is part of that phenomenon. Let me show you about a few sort of background things on how I kind of got to where I got. I teach every fall in Hong Kong for about a month, have for the last 6 years, at the University of Hong Kong. And one of these data points for me was in 2000. It was a Wednesday morning in Hong Kong, Tuesday night here in the US. And you may recall there was a really kind of weird election going on. And now there was no satellite TV news available for me. The local channels available in Hong Kong then did not dwell on the US election. And I used to cover politics, and I'm kind of a political junkie. So I was desperate for like information about what was going on. So I started going around from my little office at the university and seeing what I could do. And up in the left there is a real audio stream. I got National Public Radio's live coverage and listened to that while I clicked around from site to site. And something made me do a screen grab at the time. I just had a feeling I wanted to keep that it would matter to me some other day. And it was a point where I realized, wow, I'm getting a better news report than anybody who's watching television in the United States. That was a fairly surprising realization to me. And what's more, not only could I be getting a better report, but anybody who wanted to could get a better report than they could get by watching TV. And that if I could figure that out, anybody could figure that out, and that something new was going on. We didn't have to be satisfied anymore with the thing that gets dropped on the doorstep or the broadcast that's a linear kind of thing. We can mix and match, roll our own news. September 11th was another big turning point, not just for me, but for a lot of people in this whole phenomenon. The first way we saw things, unless we were there, was television. And then quickly, news organizations and others put things up on the web. I was in South Africa with a group of journalists doing workshops for African journalists on how to use the internet. As a matter of fact, it was one of the last Freedom Forum international events that occurred, and we're in a Freedom Forum hall here. And we were on our way from South Africa to Zambia, and there was not a lot of access to the web because the connections were fairly slow. We did get, we were able to get BBC, so we could find out a lot. But something else was going on, and that was this whole bottom-up journalism that was forming. There's a mailing list that I've been on for a long time called Interesting People, run by a telecommunications professor named Dave Farber, who he basically has thousands, tens of thousands of people he sends this to. He gets email from folks. He looks at what's interesting, and then he basically sends stuff out. People tip him, and he becomes an editor. And he really thinks of himself as an editor, and it's quite good. During that period, he was sending out enormous amounts of stuff, and very valuable stuff. And something he sent out the next day was a link to a satellite image of Lower Manhattan that gave a sense of the scale of what had happened in a way I hadn't seen anywhere else. And I thought, again, this is something new and I need to understand it better. At the same time, bloggers who were just beginning to use this tool successfully, particularly people in New York, were saying what they were seeing. And I remember one in particular. It was a guy in Brooklyn who said, "Now I know what a burning city smells like." It's said that journalists write the first draft of history. I think he did. I think in the future, people who do that are going to be, they're going to write the first draft, or at least the first bits of data that go into the real histories. Whoever does histories of that ought to use that line. It just tells you something. At the same time, out in San Francisco, a man named Tamim Ansari was, on the 12th of September, he's from Afghanistan, has lived in the US for a couple of decades. He sent an email to a few of his friends, just a few, impassioned email that said, "Now I know you're going to invade my country. Here are some things you should know before you do." And those friends he sent it to, they sent it to a few of their friends each, and it started to spread out like a phone tree, a traditional old phone tree. And very quickly, it got into the hands of people who could publish it more widely. This was from on Salon website. And it ended up getting more and more distributed around the web. And by the end of the following week, this man had been on major television news broadcasts and had kind of created himself as a respected source and a journalist from this bubbling up phenomenon that was something new. Fast forward a year and 3 months to December 2002, to one of the events that really began to crystallize not the power, but the potential of grassroots journalism. Trent Lott, at a party for Strom Thurmond, waxes nostalgic about an era of segregation, basically. And it was an outrageous comment. It was outrageous. But the major media didn't notice particularly. In fact, ABC had a little something on it, the Washington Post had it but buried it in a story. And that was about it. Not so for the bloggers, starting with some left-wing bloggers who said, this is crazy, this is outrageous, how can he get away with this? And that was picked up a couple of days later by a couple of right-wing bloggers who said, you know, they're right, he doesn't speak for me, this is wrong. And why is no one paying attention? And a lot of the fury was not just aimed at Lott, it was aimed at the media for not covering an obvious story. The story then got finally back into the major media, and then it was at that point that Lott lost his political base within the Senate and had to step down as leader of the Republicans. The bloggers didn't bring him down. The bloggers had this kind of symbiotic effect with mainstream, and it was the combined thing that brought Trent Lott down from his high post. And again, it was something I thought we needed to understand. A couple of months later, when the space shuttle broke up, re-entering the atmosphere, another data point of grassroots information that I just saved and thought would be good to have. There's a link there to a weather satellite. I circled the area in red. That's covering a substantial part of eastern Texas. That's the debris field of the shuttle coming back through the atmosphere. It's an image that, again, is a powerful image because it shows that this was a very violent occurrence. And what happened was it was not just, it was something not that I hadn't visualized until I saw that. Again, the same day, something even more interesting. A NASA engineer worked for the space agency on a mailing list where space buffs hang out, put up a note and said, you know, I don't know if this is what happened, but something hit the left wing as the shuttle is taking off. Well, that's exactly, it turned out, what happened. And this guy with authority behind him, because he worked there and knew something, he didn't tell the story. He said this might be what happened. It was a lead. It was a data point, and it was an important, again, example of something going on in that grassroots sphere of bubbling up information. Where all this has been leading me for the last few years is the notion that we have to get out of the lecture mode, what I'm doing now. That journalism is, where, it's the way it's been before as a lecture. We said, here's the news, you bought it or you didn't. And, well, you might send us a letter and, we might print it. If we're television, you send us a letter, we'll ignore you. But then it's something else is going on. It's this kind of conversation, seminar, but it's something much more interactive with, and I don't mean interactive in the sense of click a button, but interactive in the sense of a conversation. That's an important development. It's one that journalists are still getting used to. It's a hard thing to get used to because it's contrary to a lot of what we did in the past. But it stemmed for me from what has become a cliche for me, and that is that my readers know more than I do. And of course they do. And I found out 10 years ago when I went to Silicon Valley to cover technology, and they all had email even then, and they were not a bit shy about telling me that they knew more than I did. So, I would say something and I would get this flood of email from people saying, you idiot. Or when they were being nice, well, you missed something, or you got it wrong, or whatever. And, technologists are nothing if not fierce about what they think is right. So I realized this was a problem at first, like I'm being, nailed all the time by people who I don't know. Then I realized that actually it was an opportunity. Like, let's see, what do I do? I'm a journalist. What is that? I find out stuff and tell people. Oh, they know things I don't. I can tell other people. This is good. It's not, I wish I'd had that reaction fast. It took me a little while to get there, but it's true of all journalists on all beats. It's not just about technology. It's about the education writer. It's about every writer. And about every broadcast. The readers, the viewers, the audience has to know more. If they care enough to watch, then collectively they have to know more, by definition. And I have an anecdote that I tell about my readers knowing more, that where a certain CEO is discovered to his regret. This is the PC Forum conference in Arizona held every spring. Run by Esther Dyson, a well-known technology person, and she brings together technologists, people in money, journalists. It's an eclectic and interesting session. And in 2002, in Arizona, suburban Phoenix, the context is we're in this large hall, 500 or 600 people in an audience. Joe is on stage being interviewed about Quest, the big phone company that he was running at the time. And he was kind of complaining about how hard it was to raise capital. And there was a wireless connection in the room, and I and another blogger were posting to our blogs in kind of real time. And I thought, geez, this guy's complaining and he runs a monopoly. How hard is that? And I put up a note on my blog saying, Joe Naccio is whining, and this guy has gotten rich on this company, and he's whining, And a minute later, and Doc put up something roughly similar. And a minute later, both of us get an email from a guy in Florida who's reading our blogs, and he says, what a great country, and points us to a site on Yahoo Finance, which in turn points to the Securities and Exchange Commission database of insider stock trading. So it turns out while Joe Naccio has been running this company, which, well, it's a long story, but he has sold a lot of stock, several $100 million worth. That struck me as relevant. So I put it in the blog and tipped my hat to the guy in Florida. And Esther Dyson wrote later that it was right around then that the mood started to get a little chilly toward the stage from the audience. And certainly by the time the Q&A started, the audience was downright surly. And you have to picture it, because in the room probably a third to half of the people had laptop screens open, and at least a few of them were amusing themselves reading what we were saying in our blogs. And there was this kind of murmur spreading around the room. And people, I'm not convinced it was us. That I think we may have contributed, because the reason I'm not convinced is that Joe Nacho was really capable of annoying people without our help. But Esther is sure that there was some connection. And I'm happy to go along with that. But I tell the story not because the journalists are cool, and not because he learned a lesson. But the hero of the story is the guy in Florida. Before, he'd been just a member of the audience, the take it or leave it crowd. Suddenly, he knows something we don't know that's highly relevant to the subject that we're doing. He feeds it to us as fast as he can do by the speed of light and his fingers. And boom, we can put it right out again. Because we weigh it, we say, okay, this has credibility. It's coming from, first of all, someone we knew. Secondly, it's going to a database, government database, which we have some faith is at least not being made up. And so there were, you go through some journalistic process, and we put it out. But he had suddenly become part of the process of journalism in a way that was somewhat new to me. And I thought it was, again, a data point of some importance for me. For the newsmakers, of course, the news is, they can't control it. There's the funnel that they used to use to get news out is no longer quite as available. They also have a lot of options for getting the news out that they didn't have by using the same technology that's being used in a way against them. And I hope they will. At another conference that I attended later that year, Howard Rheingold, who's a brilliant author and thinker about all these things, was on stage, and someone asked him about that incident, which had been sort of becoming known, and said, isn't this going to be a deterrent to public discourse if people on stages can be nailed this way? And Howard responded to great laughter in the room, no, I think it'll be a deterrent to bullshit. And I hope that's true. But it's daunting to be actually speaking somewhere, and on a screen next to you is a back channel chat where people are saying what they think of what you're saying in real time. I've had that happen. It's different.
Actually projected.
Yeah. Professors know about this because that's what the students are doing on IM while they're talking. But some lessons in all this is that fact-checking becomes more global phenomenon. There's now a world of fact-checkers. I'm pointing to a site that I happen to like. The name is actually changed to Source something, but they look at kind of underground information spreading by PR and other folks. But it's also fast, as a journalism organization known as CBS discovered, to its dismay. And pretty instructive thing that happened. Now, a lot of what's been told about this, I think, is a little too triumphant by the bloggers. But the fact is that within minutes of that story, based on questionable memos being aired, bloggers were on the air in their own way saying, this is utter crap. It's forged. It's fraudulent. Now, they didn't know it was. And that's something to remember, that this person said forged. Well, maybe. At that moment, certainly maybe was the best you could say, because it was like an hour later or 2 hours. But what they did, which was crucial, was to raise questions, and raise the questions that CBS failed to raise in its own journalism, and dramatically failed as journalists by not doing themselves. They raised them. The mass media picked it up quickly. The Washington Post, Howie Kurtz in particular, jumped on it and started to really do some heavy-duty reporting. And the bloggers kept it up, and CBS had to back off later on. And it's a really shameful episode for journalism that happened. And in the middle of it, of course, was that amazing quote from a former CBS executive denigrating the bloggers as those people in pajamas. You know, they later became known as the pajama Hadeen. Something else going on for the newsmakers, the companies, the others who, is that customers, we're not just consumers anymore. You know, consumers have, as a friend of mine named Jerry Mikulski says, somewhat vulgarly, that consumers' role is to swallow what's fed them and crap cash. Well, we're not that anymore. We're actually in some other relationship with companies, and we really need to think about, if we're newsmakers especially, people are going to talk about and help each other about what we do, whether we want them to or not. It's an important thing. If you have a TiVo or any of these hard disk video recorders, people will tell each other how to hack them to make them work better. That may not be what TiVo wants, although TiVo recently woke up to the goodness in this rather than the problem it might cause. But again, this is an important development, and one that you don't need to have a hobbyist magazine anymore. You actually can do this very seamlessly and easily on the web, and people not only can, but they do, and they do it all the time. One lesson, again, is that secret keeping is getting a little tougher. The minute these photos were on a CD-ROM and off that camera, it was over. It was going to get out. There was no possibility it would not get out at that moment. The Pentagon's initial response to this was in part to think about banning digital cameras in military installations, which is kind of a typical government thought, but also kind of crazy when, you know, I can buy in a spy shop in Washington, D.C., a few blocks from the White House, a camera that fits into this button and takes very good pictures, thanks. And in a few years, it won't even cost much. There'll be cameras embedded in things. I kind of shudder about the privacy implications of this. But the secret keeping part is, you know, game over. And people need to understand that if they're in public life. Another data point here is that when the word of SARS got out in Guangdong province in China, where it originated, in early 2003, it was on SMS on phones. That's how the word leaked out from the medical community that something pretty bad was going on. It was not through the traditional media channels at all. In fact, the Chinese government, you know, their initial response was thinking, well, how can we control SMS? An equally problematic idea. So I recommend Howard Rheingold's book called Smart Mobs, if you haven't read it, on the SMS phenomenon. So the options are also there for the newsmakers in ways that there have not been before. After September 11th, the Washington Post did a series on what important people in government were thinking and doing right afterwards. And one of the people I interviewed was Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense. And as soon as the series had appeared in the Post, the Pentagon on its website posted the full transcript of the interview that they had done with Rumsfeld. It turned out, I saw that and said, wow, that's really cool. That's a really good thing. And I called up, and it turns out they publish the transcripts of all major interviews with Rumsfeld and Paul Wolfowitz, the deputy. And whatever you think of the Pentagon and policy, this is a good thing to do, because it's a transparency, and it's more data for people who want it. They can't grant every interview that they're requested to give. And for their point of view, if the story that results is not fair, does not reflect what they said, they can point people to the original. There are a lot of goodnesses in this that I think it makes journalists maybe have to work harder. Quoting out of context is no longer quite as easy, or at least if you do it, you're going to get, someone's going to say you shouldn't do that. However, if you're going to, organizations that do this should be consistent. The Pentagon did an interview, Rumsfeld did an interview last year with Bob Woodward, and snipped out an embarrassing section in their transcript that they posted. So the Washington Post promptly posts its own transcript with the section restored and writes a story about it. This is a stupid move by the Pentagon because it cost them credibility that they didn't need to lose at that point. So my advice to people who are in this position is do it all. You know, if you said something you regret, tough. Just get over it. And I can spend a month on this particular slide, which is how do we chase all of the lies that are out there, and how do we get truth to catch up? This is, you know, I could, maybe I should do another book on this. It's going to be tough. Readers are going to have to take more responsibility for not trusting stuff they read. We need better systems of user moderation, recommendation, reputation management at some level needs to be improved in an online world. And this is going to take time, but I think it's going to work. Something that was fascinating to me was after the shuttle crashed, NASA asked people if they had pictures. In the investigation, they said, you know, we can't comb every square mile of ground. We don't know what pictures you may have of either something you shot in the sky or on the ground in the way of debris. If you have something, please send it. And thousands of people sent in their photos. And it helped them quite a lot in the investigation of what had occurred. News organizations, a few picked up on this quickly. The BBC did a photo essay of people's personal photos before the Iraq War that was quite a moving photo essay. Increasingly, news organizations are getting this. And in the hurricanes in Florida last year, papers, not universally, but several large papers said, send us your stuff, let us know what you know, and we'll publish it. And I thought that was progress, because it was not something that had been a standard thing. But here's the thing, the readers are going to do it whether we ask them or not. This is a photo of the Australian embassy in Jakarta just after it was bombed last year by some terrorists. And before the news organizations were on the scene, somebody with a camera walking by got some pictures and posted them to the Flickr photo sharing site. So this is before the media, in quotes, have gotten there. We don't have to ask them anymore. It's going to happen without us. So I've been playing with a lot of toys and tools on things, and how to, this is kind of cool. It's the satellite uplink in a suitcase. I put it up there because it's a mere $100,000, and a decade ago it was $1 million and you needed a truck. Next, you know, in Iraq War 4, a decade from now, you'll, you know, you won't even need this. It'll probably be a mesh network that just connects things. It's the Moore's law and its corollaries. Everything's getting smaller, cheaper, easier, and more connected. There's something else that I wanted to show you.
This is Scott Madison. Can you take this Madison together? This is Happy Madison. I think all use of this Madison has expired.
So that's a little video I took in Ken Sakamura's ubiquitous computing lab in Tokyo. He's a pretty famous technology guy in Japan, and he's working on the idea that everything and everyone gets connected at some point. And he's been putting little radio tags into everyday objects as a demonstration of what's possible. In this case, it was a pharmaceutical prescription that the first example was it was conflicting with a drug you were already taking, so don't use this. The second one was that the prescription potency had expired, so don't take this. An example of what people might do. Mark Smith up at Microsoft Research is doing it with barcodes, and has a even more interesting example for me, which is they put with a handheld, they put a wireless card in it and a scanner, and they scan barcodes of products. They go out to the barcode database, find out what the product is, then they connect it to Google and find out what the Google results are and display it on the screen. So they went to a supermarket and did this with a box of cereal. Well, it turned out that the box of cereal, first result on Google was it had been recalled. And why was it recalled? Well, there was an ingredient in the cereal that had not been listed in the list of ingredients on the box. Why was this a problem? Well, because for a very small percentage of people, this ingredient is something to which they are highly allergic. It could kill them. That's relevant. And Marx says, you know, if every object can tell a story, not just every person, and the story is if you eat me, I will kill you, well, you kind of want to hear that ahead of time. The journalism piece of this I'm a little unsure of, but the human management of our lives piece, I'm very sure. Things increasingly are going to be telling us about themselves, and we have to put a lot of data together. Again, there's some very big privacy implications of this that are scary, but we need to deal with those. But it's a phenomenon we should think about. So more tools and toys. Move On, the advocacy group, had a contest last year or the year before called Bush in 30 Seconds, where they asked people using everyday camera video cameras and computers like this produce commercials about Bush. And this is the one that won. The lesson in this is that everyday technology, what is becoming everyday technology, can be used to make very powerful media in ways that were not possible before. The GarageBand software that comes with every new Macintosh is an astonishing recording studio software. It is amazing. It's not as good as the really high-end stuff, but I'll tell you, if what's available now had been available when I was playing music, I might never have stopped. It's astounding. So where is all this going? Well, I've been looking at a lot of things where journalists really aren't even part of the picture, at least the professionals. And a reader of mine sent me a note when I started working on the book saying, you know, there's something about self-assembling newsrooms in journalism, and I loved the line, and I use it. This is called the command post. It was set up to basically track everything new that was being posted anywhere on the web about the Iraq War. Now, yes, to some degree, this is a parasitic, if you want to call it that, site, but if you were covering it, it was a great place to learn what was new that you might not otherwise have spotted. And if you just cared, you would go there. They've added politics and other things to it since then. The conventions last year, bloggers were accredited for the first time at the big national political conventions. An experiment that was more interesting because they tried it than from the results of the blogging. In fact, the main result was that the mainstream media looked at the bloggers and treated the bloggers like pets. You know, oh, cute little blogger. You know, we'll work through this over a few cycles. I mean, there's now a lot of blogger fear and loathing from the mainstream media because of things going on. We'll get over it. This is Wikipedia. If you don't know it, I think this is one of the most important experiments in the world right now. Jimmy Wales and his cast of hundreds or thousands are creating an online encyclopedia where anyone, the purpose of a wiki is that anyone can edit any page, basically. So any of you can go to the Wikipedia and edit any page that you see, with a very, very few exceptions. And it sounds like anarchy, but it actually works pretty well. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. But it's not a problem either for me because something good is developing from this process. Again, it's not a direct competitor to other things. It's an addition to a media sphere that we're beginning to understand now. But I'm very impressed with this. This is another one. It's a timeline of September 11th. Some people in Canada basically asking contributors around the world is just any fact they can find, and including some suppositions, not just facts. They've created this enormous document that is very authoritative as far as I can tell. So where are we going tomorrow? The RSS, have any of you heard of RSS? Some of you, okay. More than I expected. RSS stands for many things, but my favorite is really simple syndication. The idea is that you can create information, and bloggers, understand, bloggers create RSS. It's a data format. Every time they make a posting, they created RSS, whether they intended to or not. And that's really how it got critical mass. But basically, a lot of news sites are now creating these files, and this is an example of how it works. If it looks a little bit, there are third-party software, and you can actually do it in a browser too, newer browsers. But each of these is a website along the left. Top there is the, if it were email, that would be the subject line from one of your folders, but it's the title of a posting and then the contents of the posting. This is a very efficient way to read, or to at least scan, a great deal of information. Rather than hopping around from one site to another, you can just go here and pick up a lot of things you want to know. More and more RSS is being generated. It is an area of great growth in terms of innovation and content, and I can't wait to see where it goes from here. It's also a pretty adaptable format. I have an RSS reader for my phone. It turns out that the same RSS file being created for the big screen, if all you get is the title and the summary on your phone, you've got a pretty good headline service. And there's no, and it saves the producer of the material from having to spend money on fancy servers that create special versions for little devices. It just works. Journalists in big organizations need to understand that too. There's a lot now more delivery without spending a lot of extra money on it. This is the business model that existed in Silicon Valley in 1999, which was the more money you lost, the more you were worth. And we are still a little nostalgic for this period, but I'm kind of glad personally that it's over. It means that reality has come back. But there are business models developing for grassroots citizen journalism, however we want to call it. This is called Oh My News. It's a Korean online newspaper that is, I think, the other, along with Wikinews, most important experiment in the world today. The site it has a staff of professional editors and reporters and designers, etc. Not a large staff, but most of what appears here is written by its readers, most of it. And they have different, they pay people for what they write, not a lot. There's great, people feel very good when they get an article high up in Oh My News. They have become an alternative to what was truly a monolithic news sphere in Korea, at least in the newspapers. 3 major newspapers had about 85% of all newspaper circulation. So if you think US has got consolidated media, nothing like what Korea did. And those 3 papers were very tight with government and the chaebol, conglomerates. So this was an alternative, and it really did take off over a few years. It's quite brilliant. These people are helping us understand what can be done. Other models are, the old-fashioned one, get advertising. This is a site devoted to gadgets, and they get ads from major companies. Another old model, new model, is the tip jar, getting sponsorship or asking people for money. This is a guy named Chris Albritton, a former AP reporter who had been in Iraq, and on his blog he said, "So send me money and I'll go back to Iraq." People sent him money, $14,000. And he went back to Iraq and covered the war. He ended up getting a job with Time, so maybe the business model was marketing in part. But actually, I don't mean that in a bad way. Blogs are not necessarily designed to be direct money makers. They can be, to put it bluntly, marketing brochures for one's own career. And that's not a bad thing. A lot of people are learning how useful that can be. Issues about all of this stuff is that how do we make sense? Well, there are new tools being developed to help us. They're pretty crude right now, pretty early on. This is a site called Feedster. What they do is index RSS data. That's all they do. So they run around with their little robots archiving all the RSS, and then you can search on it. I use it to find out what people are saying about my book. And Technorati indexes full content of weblogs, and they're up to almost 7 million blogs. Not all of them are being updated very frequently. In fact, most are not. But what they're doing is important to help track the conversation. We need much more granular ways of getting to the conversational level so that I want to be able to track a thread of a conversation across comments, across blogs, across other things, so I can see something in a format where I can actually understand it, where the conversation that's occurring kind of randomly or here and there is somehow made more coherent. I'm counting on people like Paul here to figure it out. Challenge. These are things. Now, I have one little political piece here, and that is a reminder that the internet was designed to be read and write, not read only. And we have a problem brewing in this country. And it stems from the way Hollywood sees the internet. And of course, there's the usual buttons of volume and channel. They've added a button they call interactivity, which is buy things. That's not my idea of interactivity. Hollywood wants to control technology that might be used to infringe on copyrights. They want to have veto power over such technology. This is a danger. This is a very big danger. The bargain copyright was supposed to set up was that you could maintain certain controls over what people could copy, how they could copy and use your stuff, though not total control, and for a limited period. Both of these concepts have been twisted out of recognition. The limited period is now effectively indefinite because by amazing coincidence, every time Mickey Mouse threatens to enter the public domain, copyright terms get extended by Congress, which gets a lot of money from Disney and other big companies that have valuable copyrighted material. That's a breaking of the bargain that we had. It's been ruled legal by the Supreme Court, but it still violates the bargain. There's a thing called fair use, which says that you can quote from other people's work. Now, in this setting, in a university, that's such a blatantly obvious thing to note, that quoting from others' work to create new works, that's what we do in scholarship and in journalism and in art. People in arts stand on each other's shoulders. It is the way it's done. Walt Disney could not have created his empire had the copyright law of today existed then. He could not have done it. And the Disney Corporation of today is routinely using things that are out of copyright in new and interesting and sometimes awful ways, but they have a right to do it because they're out of copyright. Victor Hugo is spitting wildly in his grave over what Disney did with The Hunchback of Notre Dame. But fine, that's great. And we need to protect that. That's important. This is a public commons we have to not only protect but encourage. The reason I worry is that it's going to stifle innovation, both technologically, which we need, and in in the actual creation of things. And I have one more little video to show you that this is something that is quite illegal, but this is a new kind of commentary I'm going to show you. And I think it's a work of genius, and there's no way that it's legal. But I think we need to encourage this and not shut it down. The context of this is that George Bush and Tony Blair have a close relationship. And with that, I'll just show it to you.
There's only you in my life, the only thing that's right. My you're every breath that I take, you're every step I make, and I want to share all my love with you. No one else will. And your eyes, they tell me how much you care. Oh, read my lips to dictation.
That is important that we protect, not drive underground. And I worry that copyright laws are being so twisted that, and intellectual property laws in a very general sense. I hope that we will be thinking about this over time, that we will remember that copyright was a bargain, a bargain in every sense of the word. It was not meant to be a tool of absolute control. And the reason I talk about it a lot is that the grassroots journalism I want to help foster really depends on these tools not being made illegal. It really depends on people having the encouragement and the ability to innovate and to do things that I don't expect. I mean, I'm counting on people smarter than me, younger than me, more creative than me to invent a lot of the things where I hope to just clear a little bit of brush out of the way for them. But they can't do it. They may not be able to do it if we don't have balance in this area. So, and I say that in context of my one shameless promotion slide, which is, you know, you don't have to buy my book. You can download it. Sorry, guy in the back from the bookstore. We published it under a license, a copyright license that's been created for the purpose of allowing people who want to offer a balanced copyright to do so. And it's called Creative Commons. Glenn Otis Brown, who runs it, has been here before, and Larry Lessig, who's been here before, helped create it. And what it is instead of all rights reserved, it's some rights reserved. And in the case of the book, we put it on the web from roughly the day it was in the bookstores in full, so anyone could download it if they wanted to. And if people feel free to copy it and send it around. The only restrictions that we put on is that we want, if you do it for commercial purposes, we don't want you to do that. If anyone's going to make money on the book, we'd prefer it to be us. That seems fair. And if you're going to copy it, make sure that you attribute it to me and my publisher. That also seems fair. And if you want to create something new out of it, you have to do it with under exactly the same license that we put it out. That there's a complicated way to describe that in Creative Commons, but it's a very straightforward license, and it doesn't seem to have hurt sales. I guess we'll never know. But I was fortunate to have a publisher who not only allowed me to honor copyright instead of abuse it, but who really got it himself and said, yes, this is a good thing. So that's the formal piece of this, and I'd love to take any questions that anyone has, or